Welcome to my meta talk, which was supposed to be on Friday, but since this is my first one, I want to make it good, so I apologize for the late video. So rather than talking about the current meta in this video, since it's going to change completely next week because of the Black Rock Mountain expansion, instead I'm going to give you guys some tips and advice on how to prepare for the metagame in general. Number one is we need to know what a meta actually is. So in simple terms, because I like simple terms, it is just the most popular decks being played on ladder. Let it be Face Hunter, Control Paladins, or even Mech Mage. Last thing to note is that the meta is always dynamic, also meaning that it is always changing. Let's talk about the 3 stages of meta that you can apply in every season. The first stage is rank 25 to 11. From experience, between ranks 25 to 11, there is no real meta, unless it is at the start of the season where all the high rank players drop back to the respective starting ranks, but this meta will eventually shift back to the high ranks. The fact is, everyone lacks certain cards between rank 25 to 11, and people using their own self-made decks as well, which makes the meta unpredictable. Therefore, there is no real trend to be seen. This makes aggro decks really effective here because they can easily punish inconsistent decks since they don't leave room for them to recover if they are behind, and can easily climb the ladder quickly because each match finishes before 5 minutes most of the time. So if you really want to visualize a meta between rank 25 to 11, it is pretty much all aggro decks plus a lot of randomness. I know you guys might go like, some people play Control Warrior or some high tier type of deck, and yes they do, and that is part of that randomness, but it does not happen frequently. The next stage is rank 10 to 6. This is where the meta starts to solidify and you start to see a lot of the meta decks being played. This is where you have to pick a consistent deck that you're comfortable with and get at least a 50% or higher win rate to reach rank 5. From experience, the people who knows how to tweak their decks to counter the meta here will get a higher win rate in this stage, because this stage, in my opinion, is the easiest to counter since not everybody knows how to tweak their decks, and there's a lot of players betting on a consistent deck to bring them at least a 60% win rate. You guys might see that people using rank 1 legend decks can't even bring themselves to rank 5. The reason for that is that the pro players are capable of always tweaking their decks to counter the meta, resulting in a higher win rate. As I've said before, the meta is always changing. At the moment where the deck got rank 1 legend might not be the same meta that you are in right now. My advice to you is that you need to use the legend decks only as a template and learn how to tweak them. We will talk more about that later. If you have watched my grounding hunters video, I made a deck to counter hunters because I've been encountering them 24/7, and that allowed me to reach rank 6 in less than 5 games from rank 8. This is one of the examples of how strong countering the meta is in this stage. The last section is rank 5 to legend. If you made it this far and able to stay at this stage, you're pretty much as good as I am because this is where the real game begins. From rank 20 to 6 is only 40% of your games to legend due to the fact that you gain bonus stars, but after you reach rank 5, the bonus is gone and you would need to play 60% more games to reach legend, which is quite a bit if you thought the road was tough before. This is the stage where you need to choose a consistent deck that you're really comfortable in, and I emphasize that. I recommend you only playing one deck consistently and maybe another if the meta hard counters your current deck. I will always keep 2 decks that I have at least higher than 60% win rate so that if the meta counters what I am comfortable in, I have something to fall back on. For example, I'm really comfortable with Aura Rogue, and no matter what happens, I can climb back to high ranks with it. But this deck really gets hard countered by Control Warriors, and if I see a lot of Control Warriors, I will play Druids, which is considered to be the counter to Warriors, and a deck that I'm also comfortable in. This stage of the game, the meta is very dynamic, where everyone tries to counter the top tier decks to get to the top by using several tech cards like Trump's Paladin deck. A wise statement from Masan here, he does not recommend you always using the top tier decks to climb to legend just because everyone tries to counter them to climb higher. This is because every top tier players know the top tier decks and is prepared to counter them. This is the longest road out of all the stages, as you will need the combination of time, knowledge, and mentality, because I know some people have ladder anxiety, which is something I can't teach to overcome. So this is what happens in each stage of the meta, and providing you guys a bit of transparency and awareness of what goes on there and what you need to do to prepare for it. So the next subject is basic knowledge. I'm going to explain this quite quickly as it is quite simple. When I climb ladder, I always know what the meta decks for each class are, and you Herminators out there probably have a general idea as well. If you guys really want to climb the ladder, then you guys need to do research of what the top tier decks are. This allows you to be prepared so you would know what to mulligan for and what to expect for each turn. Let's say I am playing against a control warrior and he is at 5 mana. I can anticipate and predict what he's going to play because at 5 mana there are only so many cards he can play, such as the Sludge Belcher, Brawl, Death Bite, Execute, Shield Slam, Acolyte Pain, Armor Smith, Fire War Axe, or Hero Power for instance. This gives me a bit of foresight and allows me to play around certain cards or safely overextend to put out pressure. If you watch some of my gameplay videos, I talk about a lot of possible moves the opponents can do. I know for intermediate players they already know about this, but for the beginners who are just starting out, this is the kind of thought process that I do and the basic knowledge that I need to gain in order to climb the ladder. Lastly is adapting to the meta or tweaking your decks. This is pretty much a hard topic to cover and I can't really explain exactly what you guys can do since the meta is always changing. This is why I'm doing this meta talk weekly so I can cover what changes in the meta and what you can do to counter it. However, I will share my thought process of how I tweak my decks. The first question is, when you are climbing, are you having troubles with the current meta? If you are, then ask yourself what is affecting you. For example, something like secrets, swarms, or big threats. The third question is, can you tech in these cards? You guys need to understand that teching in cards to counter the meta can potentially weaken your deck, and useless if they cannot be used. Let's say I can't handle big threats with Face Hunter, so I decided to tech in a big game hunter. Now there is a problem because ideally you need to win before the late game, and big game hunter is used to counter the late game threats. Here you have just weakened your deck where you can run better cards to strengthen your early game like Wolf Rider, Eagle Horn Bow, or even Unleash the Hounds. This is why aggro decks don't run big game hunter even if Dr. Balance exists. Another example is Aura Rogue. We don't usually see Aura Rogue running either MC Tech or Big Game Hunter because Aura Rogue can easily wipe out everything with his buff weapon plus Blade Flare or with his efficient removals, therefore making these cards not really required in the deck. So the fourth question is, does it fit in the mana curve? As I said before, we're going to use a legend deck or any consistent type of deck to climb as a template. Legend decks are usually really consistent because they have a really nice curve. So changing the mana curve can weaken the entire deck because you're making it more clunky and harder to play cards on curve. So the rule of thumb is follow the mana curve. If you're going to sub in a big game hunter, sub out something that is 3 mana. Another misconception about teching in cards is that players always think the only tech cards are Big Game Hunter, MC Tech, and also Kazan Mystic. Yes, they are good in the current meta, but you're not limited to just those cards. If you are having troubles with control matchups due to their efficient removals, you can run more stickier minions like Pilot Shredder, Sludge Belcher, or even Harvest Golem for instance. Another example is, if a lot of people are running Big Game Hunter, you can run a lot more 7 attack or less big threats, like how a lot of control warriors are now running Kalduzad or even Ysera instead of Ragnaros or Alexstrasza. This is what it means to tech in certain cards to counter the meta. This is the end of the first meta talk, and I hope it was useful for you guys. I started like a Google circle for you guys to ask me questions in because a lot of people are asking me questions all over the place. So I want something like a central hub where you can ask me all these questions. I call it the Herminator Army. So join in, ask me questions, or just hang out. It is up to you. And I will see you guys on my Monday video. Stay gold, Herminators!